You can't wear white because you're not pure anymore. That's what my sister, the one I used to adore, the one I once looked up to, said to me. Just one day, before her wedding. My name is Jordan Miller. I'm a soldier in the US Army. I've lived in barracks near the Afghan border, driven through dusty roads where gunfire could erupt at any second. I've dragged my brothers in arms out of bombed-out vehicles. I've stood at attention with blood dripping down my arm, receiving a medal for pulling someone to safety under fire. But back home, back in Charleston, South Carolina, I'm somehow not pure enough to wear an off-white dress at a family wedding. They don't see the things I've given up. They only see the cropped hair, the scar on my shoulder, and the eyes that have seen far too much. So, I did the one thing no one expected. I showed up in uniform, right there among the bridesmaids in pink chiffon, in the middle of a picture-perfect Southern wedding. I walked in as exactly who I am. And, you know what? That moment didn't ruin the wedding. It shattered the silence that had weighed on my family for over a decade. Have you ever been told you weren't enough, just for being exactly who you are? Have you ever had to stand up, not with words, but by simply showing up in your truth? If your answer is yes, or even I wish I could, then this story is for you. I remember that moment so clearly. After a brief phone call with Savannah, my sister, when she told me I'd be the maid of honor at her wedding, I sat in silence in the living room of my tiny apartment just outside the base. Part of me was happy. Some small, hopeful part wanted to believe that her invitation was a sign of forgiveness, a chance to heal the fractures we had silently accepted for years. But another part of me hesitated, as if, even after everything, something was still being left unsaid. I had been away from my family for too long. Those short visits home were just enough for small talk, a few forced smiles, and a tense dinner with unspoken walls between us. I kept wondering, did they truly see me, or were they just tolerating me? I said yes to the wedding, not out of joy, but out of duty. But that night, as I carefully folded my uniform to make space for the soft, delicate dresses I never wore, I heard her voice echo in my head. You can't wear white. You're not pure. That sentence dug into me like a dull blade. Not sharp enough to wound cleanly, but deep enough to hurt. I kept thinking about that word, pure. What does it even mean? Does it mean never making mistakes? Never going against what people expect of you? Or does it simply mean staying inside the lines someone else drew for your life? If that's the case, then no, I'm not pure. I'm a soldier. I've heard gunfire inches from my ears. I've done things that still keep me up at night, asking myself if I made the right call. But I've never, not once, been fake. And maybe that's the real problem. My family, especially Savannah, has always lived in a world of polished images and proper expectations. And me, I shattered that world. I made them uncomfortable simply by choosing a path that didn't match theirs. So now, what felt like a gesture toward reconciliation, her asking me to be her maid of honor, has turned into the start of something else entirely. Not just a confrontation with my sister, but with the shadow of perfection I've been living under for over 30 years. But this time, I felt like I couldn't and didn't want to keep bowing my head anymore. Not out of pride, not out of resentment, but because I had come too far on my own path to turn back and become the version of myself they once wished for. I had spent enough years in silence, sitting through reunions coded in small talk, watching eyes that looked at me with some blend of pity and distance. I'd gotten used to being the outsider in the very house I grew up in. So that night, I wasn't just packing a suitcase. I was gathering myself. I looked at the medal I'd been awarded after a life-or-death mission in Kandahar, where every second I stayed alive came from grit, not from being anyone's idea of a good daughter. I touched the scar on my right shoulder, the one Savannah called unfit for wedding photos. And I wondered, how many of those guests arriving at the wedding had ever stood in gunfire to save someone's life? How many had traded comfort, softness, and that so-called purity, just to keep someone breathing? I realized that if I kept shrinking, kept wearing dresses I didn't choose, kept putting on makeup to hide the marks of what I've lived through, then I wouldn't just be losing myself. I'd be silencing every woman out there like me, strong, scarred, and still choosing to keep going. I don't know what's waiting for me in Charleston. I don't know what my mother will say when she sees me. I don't know how the groom will react when he finds out the maid of honor is a wounded female soldier. And I don't know if Savannah truly wants me there, or just wants a well-shaped shadow for her perfect photographs. But I know one thing. I'm going. I'll stand there, not as a sister trying to fit a mold, but as a woman who has lived, who has fought, and who no longer apologizes for any part of who she is. Whether they choose to see me or not. I've spent my whole life trying to earn a place in a world where the standards were never based on what I believed was right. And now, standing at the edge of reconnecting with my sister, I've come to realize this. I can't keep being the only one bending, the only one softening the distance, by slowly erasing myself. I think about the soldiers I walked beside down dry, red dust roads, where every step could have been our last. We were nothing alike. Some had been yoga instructors, some were single moms, some had lived on the streets. But out there, no one cared where you came from or how many scars you carried. All that mattered was whether you'd stay when someone needed you most. I've watched a soldier throw his bleeding body over a teammate to shield them from fire. I've seen a young private cry over a letter from home, then calmly step into a combat zone the very next morning. Those people, those moments, taught me that a person's worth isn't measured by appearance, gender, or the color of a dress. It's defined by the choices you make when things get hardest. I never thought my uniform would become a statement. But now, it's the clearest reflection of who I am. No big speeches. No justifications. Just showing up, standing still, carrying every story I've lived through and survived. And if that makes someone uncomfortable, if a few eyes turn away at the reception, that's okay. Because after all these years of trying to belong to a place that never truly saw me, I finally understand, real freedom isn't being accepted. It's accepting yourself. This time, I'm not showing up at the wedding to decorate the pictures. I'm showing up to remind myself, and maybe anyone watching, that you can be different, you can be out of place, and you can still deserve a seat among the people you love. Not because you match them, but because you are you. And that is enough, //. I knew the moment I walked into that wedding in uniform, it wouldn't just be about what I wore. It would be a disruption, a break in the perfect picture my sister had worked so hard to paint. A single off-key note in the rehearsed symphony of compliments, cream-colored invitations, and chairs tied with delicate bows. But sometimes, the most powerful music begins with that one note, the one that makes people stop and actually listen. I'm no longer the little girl who used to hide behind mom's back at Easter Sunday service, forced into a floral dress, lips pressed tight in fear of being scolded for dirt on her socks. I'm not the 18-year-old who broke down when dad refused to attend my swearing-in ceremony because he couldn't believe his daughter would choose the military. I'm a grown woman now, one who's walked through fire, who knows sacrifice, who's learned how to stand back up when I thought I couldn't. But more than anything, I'm someone who's come to understand this. Family should never be the place where you have to contort yourself just to stay. Real family is where you can sit down, strip away the armor, and say, this is me. Not perfect, but real. If they accept you, beautiful. If they don't, not yet, that's okay. Because you chose to stand tall instead of bowing low. I folded my uniform one last time, not to hide it, but to bring it with me. As a quiet, unwavering statement. Whether or not Savannah is ready to see me for who I am, whether or not mom tries to shield the guests with a forced smile, I'm still going. And I'll be on time. Because a promise is still a promise. I will be her maid of honor, just like she asked. But I'll be the maid of honor who carries her past, her strength, and all the truths no one's ever wanted to confront. I'm not showing up to make a scene. But if my presence makes someone reconsider how they judge others, then that isn't a disruption. It's a beginning. And maybe, just maybe, the real beginning between my sister and me won't start with white dresses, champagne, and flower arrangements, but with a uniform, some truth, and the courage to show up as we are. //. As the plane touched down at Charleston International Airport, I could feel the tension tightening around my chest like a quiet fist. Even after telling myself 100 times that I didn't need anyone's approval, didn't need anyone's validating glance, I still couldn't stop my heart from clenching at the thought of seeing my whole family again for the first time in years. I walked out of the airport, pulling my suitcase behind me and carrying a garment bag with my uniform, the same uniform I used to hide like it was something too sensitive to show. But not this time. This time, I didn't hide it. It wasn't just a uniform. It was part of my body, part of my story, the part my family had always politely pretended didn't exist. The house I grew up in looked the same. White paint, a cute little fence, and flower pots that my mother still tended with the same careful touch. But as I stepped through the doorway, everything felt distant. Like I had walked into a museum of my own memories, familiar, but sealed behind glass. My mother greeted me with a short smile, a light hug, and words I wasn't sure were warm or just well-rehearsed. Welcome home. My father shook my hand, in the same way he always did with people he hadn't fully made his mind up about. Savannah was different. She hugged me tightly, but never met my eyes. I could feel the stiffness in her arms, like both of us were holding back 1,000 unsaid things. After a few lines of small talk, she pulled me aside and spoke in a quiet but unmistakably clear voice. Please don't wear white, even if it's just for the rehearsal dinner. I looked at her, said nothing. Because, you know, she added, avoiding my eyes, you're not pure anymore. Not pure anymore. 3 words, once again, hit me like a polished blow, wrapped in politeness, but cruel underneath. But this time, I didn't lower my head. I just smiled very slightly and nodded, because I had already decided, if they couldn't see my worth for what it truly is, then I would stand tall and make them see it. Not with arguments, not with tears, but simply by showing up. And so, In the house where I had once felt the smallest and most out of place, I began preparing for a ceremony where, for the first time, I wouldn't be playing a role. I would simply be myself. Completely. Unhidden. Unapologetic. Unbowed. // That night, I sat alone in my old bedroom, now turned into my mother's home office, with a temporary folding bed and a fresh vase of peonies that seemed like her quiet attempt at goodwill. I looked around the room where I once hung maps, sketched with charcoal, and dreamed of a life far bigger than the one others had quietly chosen for me. On the desk, my mom had left a handwritten card. "Welcome home, Jordan." I wasn't sure whether to smile or feel sad, because even in its warmth, the message carried a kind of distance, as if I'd just returned from a semester abroad, not from a war zone where people don't always come back. I opened my suitcase, pulled out the cream-colored dress, the only thing I'd packed besides my uniform, and hung it on the closet door. I had thought it was modest enough, safe enough, to not rattle anyone, least of all my sister or her soon-to-be in-laws. But clearly, for Savannah, anything even close to white was crossing a line. It was a silent declaration that I wasn't worthy. I sat down, elbows resting on my knees, head bowed. Not in tears, not in anger. Just that familiar cold settling in again. The feeling of being on the outside of a family portrait I once thought I belonged in. There's a truth I used to be afraid to admit. Even though we share blood, Savannah and I grew up in two different worlds. Hers was polished, shaped by expectations and picture frames perfectly aligned down the hallway. Mine was made of questions no one wanted to answer, bruises from climbing trees and dresses, and the aching suspicion that maybe I wasn't born to fit here. But I've lived. I've gone, fought, loved, and lost. And I didn't come back to ask for permission to exist. I came back to exist on my own terms. So I stood up, pulled a uniform bag close, and unzipped it. The scent of thick fabric and the glint of metals hit me like a quiet anthem. A reminder, I am Jordan Miller. I don't need anyone's permission to be someone. I already am. And this time, I won't tuck that away just to make people more comfortable. I carefully folded the cream dress and slid it into the bottom compartment of my suitcase. I didn't need it anymore. Not because I wasn't pure enough, but because I am already enough. With every truth I carry, with every ounce of loyalty and strength, I don't need any color to validate my worth. Tomorrow morning, I'll wake up, put on my uniform, tie my hair back, and walk into that ceremony with the posture of a soldier. Not to defy my sister, but so I never again have to defy myself. // The next morning, sunlight filtered through the window blinds, casting streaks of light across the worn-out carpet of the room that once held my childhood. I opened my eyes with a strange clarity. No more nerves, no fear like the family gatherings before. Just stillness. A stillness that felt like the aftermath of a long war, the kind you fight within yourself. I woke early, showered, tied my hair back at the nape, and wiped away the leftover makeup from the night before. In front of the mirror, I put on my uniform, the one lined with medals that had traveled with me through so many chapters. My hands trembled slightly as I fastened the final button, not from fear, but from something deeper. Each motion felt like I was cutting through the invisible ties I'd carried since girlhood. Every medal wasn't just an achievement, it was proof of a life my family had never once asked about. The mirror reflected a woman standing tall, eyes steady. A body that didn't fit the soft silhouette expected at a wedding, but one that carried a strength that couldn't be hidden. Not the version of perfection they may have wanted, but the truest version of me. I left the room, carrying the bridesmaid dress bag like a final punctuation mark on years of quiet self-editing. As I descended the stairs, my mother stood at the stove, back turned. She looked up at the sound of my footsteps, her eyes landing on the uniform. She didn't speak for a moment. Not from anger, not quite from acceptance either, but because for the first time she was truly seeing me. "You're really wearing that?" she asked, softly, unsure in a way I'd never heard before. "I am," I said, eyes locked with hers. "Because this is me." She gave the slightest nod, then turned back to the kettle. No words of encouragement, no protest. But that nod, *** for today, ***, was enough. When I arrived at the lakeside resort just north of the city, the wedding venue, I stepped into the bridal suite where the bridesmaids were busy adjusting dresses, fluffing extensions, giggling over mimosas. Then the room fell quiet. All eyes turned to me. No one said a word at first. They didn't have to. Their silence spoke louder than anything else. I saw it all in their faces. The shock, the unease, and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of respect. Then Savannah turned. She had been laughing with the makeup artist when she saw me standing there. Her smile froze. "Jordan," she said, her voice tight. "What is this?" I stepped forward. I didn't bow my head. I didn't apologize. This is me. The real me. The silence stretched thin, like a wire pulled to its limit. I knew I had just dropped an emotional grenade at the center of this carefully curated celebration. But if something needed to be broken so that something real could be rebuilt, then today was the day. And I was ready. // Savannah stared at me like she was trying to decipher what was happening. Her eyes flicked quickly across each medal on my chest. The bronze star, the silver star, the purple heart, as if she were reading a language she'd never learned. Maybe, in her mind, I was still just the defiant little sister who got sent home with teacher notes, who had to be reminded to sit still during prayer. She had never really known, never wanted to know, who I'd become since the day I left this house. "Why are you wearing that?" she asked, her voice low, strained with an effort to stay composed. "This is my wedding, Jordan. It's not a military parade." I took a deep breath, not to fight back, but to keep my voice soft, steady, amid the flood of emotion rising inside me. "I know," I said, "and I know I'm your maid of honor. I know I'm your sister, but I'm also a soldier. That's a part of me I've hidden for too long when I've stood in front of you. I'm not here to ruin your day. I'm here to show up as all of me." Savannah let out a short, sharp laugh, more blade than humor. "All of you? You mean the scars, the war wounds, the navy blue uniform in a sea of cream and pastel florals?" "No," I said calmly. "I mean the courage, the honesty, the decision not to hide anymore. I mean I can't put on a blush lace dress just to match the pictures, if it means erasing who I am." Silence stretched thin and tense like a wire pulled to snapping. The bridesmaids instinctively moved aside, avoiding eye contact, no one stepping in. The air felt thick. The only sounds were the soft clicking of a curling iron and the faint sweetness of perfume lingering in the room. Savannah turned away, took a few steps, and stopped, her fingers gripping the stem of a champagne flute tightly. "I don't need you to be like me," she said without turning, "but I don't want to be the joke of my own wedding." I clasped my hands behind my back, the stance of a soldier at ease. My voice softened, more sincere than it had ever been. "I'm not here to turn your wedding into anything but a beautiful ceremony. I don't need to stand next to you in the photos. I don't need to be on the stage. I just need to be here, as myself. Just once. I want you to see me, not the girl you used to wish I was, but the woman who's standing in front of you." Just then, the door opened. My mother stepped in, bringing a gust of outdoor air with her, her shawl still loosely draped around her shoulders. She froze when she saw me in uniform, then looked to Savannah, standing tense, turned away. I glanced at my mother, said nothing. She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes searching for something unspoken. Then she stepped forward, slowly, and laid a hand on my shoulder, right over the scar beneath the fabric. "You came home," she whispered. Just those 4 words. But I knew she saw me. Maybe she didn't fully understand yet. But she saw me. And for now, that was enough. That was the beginning. // Savannah stood with her back to me, her fingers clenched so tightly the knuckles had gone white. I saw her shoulders tremble, not knowing if it was anger, disappointment, or something deeper. My mother's hand still rested lightly on my shoulder, so light it barely registered, but it was enough to tell me she was trying, in her slow and imperfect way, to grasp what was unfolding between her 2 daughters. "Savannah," my mother said, her voice more firm than usual. "Jordan is home. She's not ruining anything. She's just choosing to show up in her own way." Savannah turned around, her face flushed, but her expression had shifted. No longer angry, just overwhelmed, hurt, and confused. Like we were both caught in a moment no one had prepared us for. "I don't know what to do," she said softly, almost confessing. "Everything was planned. Every detail. Every person. And now, this. People will look, they'll whisper, they'll think. People always talk, Savannah," I interrupted gently but firmly. Even when I stayed quiet, they still called me the rebel, the one who didn't fit the mold. But I'm tired. Tired of trying to squeeze myself into a shape I was never made for. Savannah didn't respond, but her eyes turned glassy. Something cracked in her gaze. Not surrender, but realization. A hairline fracture through years of tension and misunderstanding. "So, what do you want?" she asked, for the first time without defensiveness. "You want to walk down the aisle in that uniform? Next to me? In the photos? In front of everyone?" I paused for a moment, then nodded. Not to make a statement. Just so I don't have to pretend anymore. Not even for one day. No one spoke for a long while. The room felt still, but no longer suffocating. My mother stepped back, letting us face each other not as bickering children, but as 2 women finally meeting where they truly were. Eventually, Savannah stepped forward and stood in front of me. She looked at me for a long time, like she was trying to memorize everything she'd never allowed herself to see. "You drive me crazy," she said, her voice soft now. "You always have. Even when we were little." You made me feel so rigid, so boring, like the one who always followed the rules and never stood out. I let out a quiet, bittersweet laugh. And I always felt like your shadow, the messy, imperfect one who kept getting it wrong. We looked at each other. And then, like something we had both carried too long was finally let go, Savannah exhaled deeply, then suddenly pulled me into a hug. Not the stiff one from the day I arrived. A real one. The kind we hadn't shared since we were girls lying side by side at night, whispering dreams and fears into the dark. Okay, she whispered, her voice thick. If you want to walk down that aisle in uniform, then you'll walk down that aisle in uniform. As the maid of honor. As my sister. I held her just a little tighter, then let go. Neither of us said anything else. But the silence between us was no longer cold. It was the silence of understanding. And from there, everything began to shift. For the first time in years, I felt truly invited, not just to a wedding, but back into this family. Not because I'd changed to fit them, but because I dared to show up as who I really was. And sometimes, that's the only thing you need to begin healing. // The wedding took place that afternoon, beneath golden sunlight that felt almost too perfectly placed, like the setting itself had conspired to create a flawless moment. The garden behind the lakeside resort looked like something out of a storybook, a floral arch of white roses and baby's breath, rows of chairs lined precisely, silk ribbons fluttering gently in the breeze. A soft piano melody played in the background, each note sinking into the skin like a whisper. I stood among the bridesmaids, surrounded by women glowing in blush pink dresses, while I wore a crisp, formal military uniform. I didn't feel out of place. I didn't shrink back. I didn't take delicate, silent steps like someone trying to fit in. I walked the way I'd been trained to, like a soldier. Steady, certain, unapologetic. And as I reached the front of the aisle, I noticed the guests' gazes begin to shift, some furrowed brows, some startled glances. But then there were nods. Quiet ones. Looks filled with respect. Maybe they didn't all understand, but at least they saw. Savannah appeared, arm in arm with our father, her white dress billowing like clouds around her. The wedding carried on into the evening, the music shifting from soft symphonies to vibrant, pulsing rhythms. The guests began to relax, shedding the formality of the ceremony and embracing the joy of celebration. I stood quietly at the edge of the dance floor, a glass of lemonade in hand, watching it all, Savannah laughing loudly with her friends, Ryan holding her close in a gentle slow dance, and my parents seated at the head table, their faces no longer carrying the tightness they had worn that morning. That's when an older man approached me. He walked with a crisp posture, his silver hair neatly trimmed, his charcoal suit pressed to perfection. As he extended his hand, I responded almost instinctively with a military handshake. Staff Sergeant Miller? He asked, his eyes sharp but kind. I'm Edward Brooks, retired colonel, close friend of Ryan's father. I just wanted to say, today, you reminded me of a great many things. I was caught off guard, but held my composure. An honor to meet you, sir, I replied. He nodded, and something flickered in his eyes, something deeper than courtesy. You walked into that room with the dignity of a soldier, and the humility of someone who knows when to stand still. Today, you didn't just preserve your own honor. You made this wedding feel more real, more human. Thank you for that. For a moment, I couldn't speak. No one had ever said anything like that to me, at least not in spaces where I was usually considered the one who didn't fit in. My voice caught slightly as I nodded and replied, Thank you, sir. I just tried to live true to who I am. He smiled, placed a hand on my shoulder, then slowly made his way back toward the reception tables. I caught my own reflection in the large mirror near the dance floor, not the awkward little sister my family used to see, but a grown woman. Steady, proud, at peace. A little later, Savannah came over. She looked different now, less polished, more real. There was a softness in her that hadn't been there earlier. Ryan's being dragged into a photo shoot with his coworkers, she said with a small laugh. I snuck out here to breathe. I nodded, smiling back. She looked at me for a long moment, then asked gently, This morning, I said things I shouldn't have, but you still came. You stayed. Why? I didn't answer right away. I looked up at the string lights hanging across the garden, the warm golden glow resting on my shoulders, like for one night. Everything was softer. Because I'm your maid of honor, I said quietly. And your sister. I don't want love to only exist when everything's easy, when we all look the same. I want to be loved even when I'm different. Savannah said nothing. Then, she stepped in and wrapped her arms around me. Not to make peace, but to say something deeper, a silent apology. A wordless acceptance. I'm proud of you, she whispered. You didn't outshine anyone today. You made people look inward. I held her back, gently. Just enough to know that the wall between us, that invisible one built from years of distance, expectations, and unspoken wounds, had finally begun to crack. Maybe tomorrow, we'll still disagree. We'll still be different. But tonight, in this moment, we are sisters again. And that bond, restored not through conformity, but through the very thing people once called defiance, was sealed by honesty. Absolute honesty with who I am. And that, to me, was the greatest gift of the day. Not the flowers, not the dress, not the vows, but the truth and the forgiveness. / the wedding ended late. As the lights began to dim and the last songs echoed with fading warmth, I stepped outside into the open air. The night breeze carried the damp sweetness of flowers and a hint of cold from the nearby lake. I stood there alone, quietly taking in that familiar emptiness that follows celebration, when all the laughter, all the toasts, all the beauty suddenly feels fleeting. But this time, the emptiness didn't come with loneliness. I was no longer standing on the sidelines. I was no longer a shadow. I had stepped in, stood at the center, and remained myself. The back door creaked open. It was my mother. She was still in her shimmering silver dress, a sheer wrap draped softly around her shoulders. She walked toward me, holding 2 paper cups of hot tea from the resort's kitchen. "Do you want one?" she asked, offering me a cup. I took it, my hand brushing hers. For the first time in years, we stood next to each other in silence that wasn't awkward. We both looked out over the lake. The water was still, mirror-like, reflecting the scattered lights from the reception hall behind us. "Today, I didn't expect it to end like this," she said slowly. "In a good way or a bad way?" I asked, half teasing, half genuine. She let out a soft laugh, a tired but relieved kind of laugh. "Good. At first I was worried, really worried. But when you walked in that uniform, do you know what people said?" I shook my head. They didn't talk about disruption. They talked about courage, about honesty, about seeing a woman brave enough to live as she is. I stayed quiet. Something in my chest loosened. She turned to look at me, and this time, there was no defense in her eyes. "I didn't understand why you chose that path," she said. "I was scared. I thought if you lived that way, you'd get hurt, judged. But today I realized something. You're not someone who needs protecting. You're someone who protects." I turned to her. My eyes welled unexpectedly, not from sadness, but from the weight of being seen. Fully, at last. "Thank you," I whispered. "I've waited a long time to hear that." She gave my hand a gentle squeeze. "I'm sorry I didn't say it sooner." I shook my head. "It's okay. You said it now." We stood there for a while longer. Then she gave my shoulder a soft pat, the way my father used to when he didn't have words, and headed back inside. I stayed. This time, truly alone. And as I lifted my gaze to the night sky, the stars above shimmering in silence, bearing witness to all that had shifted, I felt something deeply clear in my heart. I hadn't come to my sister's wedding to change them. I had come so I wouldn't lose myself. And somehow, through unapologetic presence, through unfiltered honesty, I had opened a door for my entire family to begin changing. No speeches. No force. Just by being me. And maybe, that's the greatest power a person can carry, on any battlefield. Whether in uniform, or in the very home where they once felt most unseen. / after the wedding, I returned to Fort Liberty, the base I had for years called home, more easily than any place that was ever supposed to belong to me. But something felt different this time. I no longer felt the need to split myself in two, between Jordan the soldier and Jordan the sister. I no longer needed to choose a role to make anyone comfortable. I had learned how to show up as both, strong and vulnerable, armored and full of feeling. What I didn't expect was that the change didn't end with me. My mother, who used to send me care packages filled with cosmetics and glossy fashion magazines, now asked, "What do you need? Snacks? Thick socks? A good notebook?" My father, who once dodged every conversation about the war, started forwarding me articles about women in the military, sometimes with short notes like, **, great read. Reminds me of you. **, and Savannah, my sister, the woman who used to obsess over appearances. Now, she sends random messages, unpolished, unfiltered. Things like, "Just finished a book on PTSD. You ever read it?" Ryan and I argued over baby sleep schedules. Being a soldier might be easier than being a mom, huh? This kid is kicking me from the inside. I think she's going to be stubborn like you. At first, I just smiled quietly when I saw them. But soon I realized that was her way of reaching out, not with perfect words, but with real effort. Her way of stepping into my world, even if it was just one small step at a time. And then one day she called. Her voice sounded different, nervous but earnest. "Jordan, I want to ask you something." I waited. "Ryan and we want you to be the baby's godmother." I froze. "You can say no," she added quickly. "I get that you're busy, you have your duty, and maybe this feels like a lot. But I just think, if there's anyone our child should learn from, someone she should see every day and believe she can be anything, it's you." I couldn't speak for a few seconds. My throat tightened. Savannah, I whispered. I don't even know what to say. Just say yes or no. I'll take care of the rest. I smiled. A quiet kind of smile, full of a softness I hadn't felt in a long time. Yes, I said. And that kid will never have to wear pink if she doesn't want to. Savannah laughed, the kind of laugh I hadn't heard in years, one without distance or defense.
Deal, she said.
And just like that, after years of living between expectations and silence, inside stories already written for us, we finally learned how to write a new one. Not with ink, not with pressure, but with real steps, slow and steady, reaching toward each other. And that is what family really is. // a few months later, I was invited to speak at the career orientation day at my old high school in Asheville. The same place where I was once known as the girl who talked back, a student with potential but no discipline, and most memorably, the name teachers would invoke to warn other well-behaved girls. *, don't be like Jordan. *, and yet here I was, invited back, not to serve as a cautionary tale, but to inspire. They wanted me to speak to students standing at the crossroads, college, military, trade school, or just trying to figure out who the hell they were. I stood on the small stage in the auditorium, wearing the same uniform I'd worn to my sister's wedding. A uniform that now carried not just medals and scars, but also the quiet rebirth of a relationship I once thought was broken beyond repair. In front of me were hundreds of faces, eyes filled with curiosity and doubt. A few girls had soft purple-dyed hair, hoodies pulled halfway over their heads, so much like I once was that it made me smile. I didn't start with stats. I didn't list my credentials. I started with a question. How many of you have ever been told you're too stubborn, too difficult, or too different? Dozens of hands shot up. Without hesitation, I nodded slowly. Then I have something to say to you. Being different is not a weakness. It's a map, a compass. It's the thing that will lead you down a path only you are meant to walk. I told them about standing in the red dust desert for the first time, about the first sleepless night on the line, about the gut-clenching fear of hearing real gunfire, and the strength I didn't know I had until it rose up to protect someone else. I told them about the cream-colored dress that got rejected, the scar my sister wanted me to cover, and the decision I made not to hide anymore. Not for my family and not for myself. Some battles, I said, voice low now, don't show up on any world map. They happen inside you, or between you and the people you love most. But when you stand tall and say, I am who I am, not perfect, not standard, but real, then no matter what happens next, you've already won. After the talk, a small girl with wild curls approached me. She wore a threadbare wool coat, and her hands trembled as she held a folded page of notes. I'm thinking about joining the military too, she said, her eyes flickering between fear and hope. But my parents say, girls who choose that path are throwing their lives away. I crouched down slightly, locking eyes with her, and I said, there's no path that's a failure if you walk it on your own 2 feet. And don't ever let anyone convince you that you need permission to be yourself. She nodded, and I knew a seed had just been planted. When I left the auditorium, there was no bitterness left in me for the past, just a quiet peace. Because somehow, I had turned the very things that once made me feel othered into light for someone else. Not everyone is made to fit a mold, but everyone deserves to live a life that is full, honest, and free. / that afternoon, I left my old high school with a lightness in my step, not because every wound had healed, but because I had finally learned how to carry them without letting them weigh me down. As I pulled out of the parking lot, my phone buzzed with a message from Savannah. The first thing that appeared was a photo, a tiny foot wrapped snugly in a pale yellow knitted blanket. Below it, a simple line of text. She's here. Her name is Hope. You're officially a godmother. I pulled over to the side of the road, and before I even realized it, the tears came. Not out of sadness, but because, for the first time in my life, I was being called something new, not the rebellious sister, not the difficult soldier, but godmother. Someone trusted to pass something on. Someone who mattered to the next generation. I texted back, hands trembling. Hope is the most beautiful name, and you chose the right person to walk with her. Savannah responded with a single red heart emoji. No long message.
No explanation.
But I understood. That small gesture held more meaning than any conversation we'd ever had before. A few weeks later, I flew back to Charleston to meet Hope. She was so tiny I was afraid I might break her with a single touch. But when I held her, she didn't cry. Instead, her little hand curled around my finger, as if she already recognized a kind of safety that didn't need a name. Savannah stood nearby, her face tired but peaceful. She looked at me, not with comparison, or expectation, or distance, but with the quiet recognition of 2 women who had finally learned to accept each other. I hope she gets a little of your rebellious streak, she said, half teasing. And I hope she gets some of your steadiness. I replied, smiling. We both knew Hope would grow up in a world full of rules, of silent pressures, of unspoken expectations. But now, she wouldn't grow up in silence like we once did. She would have a brave mother and a godmother ready to tell her one day, being yourself, no matter how different, is the most valuable thing you'll ever be. In the months that followed, I returned to base life, to training drills, deployments, long sleepless nights. But now, whenever exhaustion crept in, whenever I felt misplaced under the weight of duty, I'd think back to Hope's first touch, Savannah's changed gaze, and the reflection I saw in the mirror that morning I wore my uniform to a wedding. I used to think strength meant knowing how to fight. But I've come to realize, true strength is when you no longer have to fight to be who you are, when you can stand in this world, without armor, without defense, and still walk forward, rooted in the quiet, unshakable belief that, I am not perfect, but I am enough. And the miracle is, when you believe that long enough, the people around you begin to believe it, too. They don't need you to change. They just need you to be brave enough to show up. / time passed, and I continued to receive photos of Hope from Savannah. Every small milestone, her first smile, her first steps, her first spoonful of mushy rice, arrived in my inbox like quiet reminders that said, you are part of this life. One day, Savannah texted, Hope won't sleep without the teddy bear you gave her. I'm pretty sure she'll cling to it until high school. I laughed to myself, alone in my modest barracks room. There are connections that don't require blood or daily presence. They exist because they're built on unconditional love. Then one day, in the middle of an intense training cycle, I received an email from the command office. I had been selected as one of 3 women service members to represent at a national conference on women in military leadership. The year's theme, courageous presence, when women enter spaces not built for them. I stared at the subject line, throat tight. Spaces not built for them. I had lived in dozens of such spaces, family dinners, wedding receptions, classrooms, schoolyards, even the echoing halls of my own self-doubt. Places where I once asked myself, is there room for someone like me here? But time and time again I walked in. Not loudly. Not asking for permission. Not needing applause. I simply walked in, carrying every part of who I am, scars, strength, tenderness, resolve. And little by little, those spaces changed. I accepted the invitation. At the conference, I didn't speak of medals. I didn't list my credentials. I told the story of the cream-colored dress, of the morning I stood among women in pink gowns, wearing my uniform, my hands trembling from fear, but refusing to retreat. I spoke of the first time my father looked at me, not with disappointment, but with silent pride. I told them about Hope, a child born into a world where I once believed I didn't belong, now choosing me as her guide. And I ended with a message. If you've ever walked into a room and felt like you don't belong, don't ask what's wrong with you. Ask if that room was ever built to welcome someone like you. And if it wasn't, don't walk out. Stay. Be present. Let your presence reshape the room until it is wider, warmer, more honest. After the speech, a middle-aged woman approached me, her eyes glassy with emotion. She held my hand tightly and said, My daughter feels lost inside our own home. Tonight, I'm going to tell her, I see you, and I will learn how to understand you. I held her hand. There were no words big enough for that moment. But I knew another barrier had crumbled. Another child would grow up in a safer space. And as for me, I'll keep walking, not to break things, but to open them, step by step, person by person, room by room, because that's what courageous presence does. Not with force, but with truth and a heart that is no longer afraid to be exactly what it is. / a few months after the conference, I received an invitation to return to my old unit for a distinguished service recognition ceremony. It wasn't because I was leaving the military, my commitment still had a few years left, but because I had been named among those who helped shape the core values of the regiment. I was stunned when they read my name aloud. The ceremony took place on a wide, open training field, the same ground where I had once crawled through mud and sweat during late-night drills. Flags fluttered in the wind, long rows of chairs lined up in formation. As I stepped onto the platform to receive the commendation, I looked out and saw familiar faces. Ramirez, who had crawled through gunfire beside me to survive. Davis, who had stayed late to coach my marksmanship until my wrists went numb. And the new recruits, bright eyes, clean uniforms, full of the hunger to be part of something greater than themselves. I took the plaque in hand and glanced down at my uniform, the same one I'd worn at the wedding, at the school auditorium, through sleepless deployments. But now it felt different. It was no longer a suit I wore to prove my worth. It had become a symbol I carried by choice, because I had learned that my worth didn't lie in anyone's permission to exist, but in my own unwavering refusal to abandon who I am. After the ceremony, a young female recruit approached me, her stance slightly stiff with nerves. She stood at attention and saluted. "Staff Sergeant Miller," she said. "I just wanted to thank you. I almost quit during week 3 of training. They told me I was too emotional to be a soldier. But I remembered your story." I nodded, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Emotion isn't weakness," I said. "It's your radar. When you know how to feel, you know how to protect others. Don't ever let anyone take that from you." She nodded, eyes glossy with tears. That evening, back at the barracks, I opened my laptop and began writing a letter, not to a commanding officer, but to Hope, my goddaughter. She was still far too young to read it. But one day, I knew she would need these words. "Dear Hope, when you grow up, the world may try to teach you that you have to be like someone else. That you must avoid certain things, behave a certain way, fit the mold to be loved. But I hope you'll remember this. You don't have to be like anyone else to be worthy. You just have to be yourself, authentic, brave, and full of love. Because you, as you are, will be the gift this world didn't even know it was waiting for. With all my heart, your Aunt Jordan, the one who will always stand beside you, no matter which path you choose." When I clicked save, the screen reflected a face I barely recognized. No longer the girl who stormed out of her family home with a packed bag and silence trailing behind. No longer the rookie soldier with something to prove. What stared back at me was a woman who had lived through war, through heartbreak, through the aching quiet of her own family, and survived. Not just survived, but lived right, lived fully. And that was the greatest victory I had ever won. There was no parade, no marching band, just a quiet peace in my chest. A peace no medal could ever award, except the one you give yourself when you choose you in a world that constantly asks you to choose someone else. // That winter, I visited Savannah, Ryan, and baby Hope at their cozy little house in the suburbs of Charlotte. The home was drenched in soft sunlight, with a white wooden porch, a neatly trimmed lawn Ryan tended with care, and an inside that pulsed with a warmth I hadn't realized I'd missed. Hope was almost a year old now. Her eyes gleamed like early morning lakes, and her tiny, chubby hands never stopped moving. She crawled across the floor nonstop, dragging behind her the same teddy bear I'd given her as a newborn. Savannah couldn't stop laughing. For the first time, I saw her without the tightness in her eyes. No need to fix, no need to control. Just a mother learning how to live inside the beauty of imperfection. "I still can't believe you used to be the rebellious one," she said, pouring tea, while keeping one eye on Hope. I laughed. "You once called me the family PR disaster." Savannah burst out laughing. "Yeah, and you showed up in full uniform to my wedding. Who would have guessed that would be the moment our family actually started talking?" I didn't answer. I just looked at Hope, a little soul who'd never known pressure, never been forced to choose between being acceptable and being herself. I bent down and picked her up, holding the warmth and weight of her in my arms. Hope stared at me, wide-eyed, then burst into giggles, slapping both hands against my cheeks like she was saying, "I've known you forever." In that moment, I thought about everything that had brought me here, from my silent enlistment to the war zones, the wedding day full of conflict, the first time my father looked at me with pride, my mother's quiet apology, Savannah's trembling embrace. Each moment, a step on the long road back to my truest self. And then I thought about the future. I didn't know what kind of world Hope would grow up in. Maybe one still filled with judgment, pressure, voices trying to mold her into something she's not. But I knew one thing for sure. She wouldn't face it alone. She would have a mother who chose change, a father who listened, and a godmother, once called different, once forced to fight just to be seen, but who never stopped trying to be a safe place for the kids who just needed to be themselves. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "Grow strong.
Be brave.
And if one day you feel lost in this world, remember, you don't have to fit into anything. The world needs you, just as you are." She giggled again, that pure, unbothered laugh of someone untouched by doubt. Winter sunlight spilled across the window, casting a soft glow over the three of us, a little girl, a mother, a soldier, writing a new chapter of family together. No more pain, no more silence, no more struggle, only truth. And love, unconditional, unboxed and unbound. One evening, just before I was set to leave Charlotte and return to base, Savannah walked into the living room while I was packing my rucksack. She sat down beside me without a word. We simply looked at each other. Two women who had come a long way from where we started, now pausing to breathe in the middle of a long journey. "I still think about that day," Savannah said, her voice low. "The day you walked into my wedding in uniform. I was genuinely furious. I thought you were trying to embarrass me." I smiled, without resentment. "I know. But then," she went on, "I looked around. I saw people's faces, and then I saw the way Dad looked at you. For the first time, he looked at you like someone he no longer wanted to fix. He just looked proud." I nodded. I had seen that look too, and I'd been carrying it in my heart ever since. The funny thing is, she said, I always thought I was the one hurting you all these years. But the truth is, I was hurting too, because I couldn't reach you. You were the only one in the family brave enough to walk away, to screw up, to defy everything. And I was jealous of that. But I didn't realize it, until I became a mother. Her words stopped me cold. Some truths can only be spoken once we're old enough, soft enough, and brave enough to look back with forgiveness. Hope changed me, she continued. She taught me I can't control everything. That love isn't about molding someone. It's about letting them breathe, letting them choose, letting them mess up, and still loving them. I placed my hand over hers, gave it a gentle squeeze. That's exactly what I hope for her. She looked at me, her eyes shining. Me too. And I want her to grow up knowing she has a godmother who isn't just a war hero, but someone who had the courage to walk back into the house that once hurt her and love it in her own way. We didn't say anything more. Just a long, full embrace. No distance.
No question.
Just understanding. The next morning, I left early. Savannah and Ryan came to see me off, Hope still drowsy in her mother's arms. As I climbed into the car, Savannah called out, "Jordan." I turned around. "I still don't love cream dresses," she said with a grin, "but if you ever get married one day, wear whatever color you want." I burst out laughing, eyes brimming. "You know me. I'll probably wear my uniform." Savannah shook her head, laughing.
"Still you.
Stubborn to the end. "And you," I said, "have finally softened." And in that laughter that floated into the quiet morning, I realized something profound. We didn't need to be the same. We didn't need to understand each other completely. We just had to not give up on each other. And maybe that's the most enduring kind of love two people can offer. After the storms of youth, the weight of expectations, the years of silence, and the long journey back to self. A love that doesn't require sameness to be real. Just enough space to hold our differences. And the willingness to stay. // On the drive back to base, I moved through long stretches of quiet roads, the winter trees bowing gently in the cold wind. Everything outside was still, but inside me, something warm had begun to rise. Not joy, not excitement, but a rare kind of peace. As if the scattered pieces of my life had finally found where they belonged. I used to think I could only be one of two things, either the hardened soldier or the not quite soft enough little sister. But now, I knew I could be both. I could stand tall in uniform, wear my scars without shame, and still hold a child in my arms, singing lullabies in my rough, husky voice. Maybe I wasn't anyone's perfect template, but I was my own design, built from blood, from tears, and from every time I chose not to give up. When I reached the gate, the guard saluted me with a familiar nod. I returned it and drove through the roads that had been worn thin by countless formation drills. Everything looked the same, disciplined, rigid, structured, but I saw it differently now. Not as a place I had run to, but as a place where I had claimed myself. And now, as a place I returned to, not out of obligation, but out of choice. At our weekly briefing, the commander asked me to speak to the new recruits about resilience in service. I stood in front of them, faces young, wide-eyed, unsure, and I didn't speak about medals or campaigns. I spoke about the path that had led me here. I told them about the day I wore my uniform to my sister's wedding, a day I wasn't exactly welcomed, but showed up anyway. I said, resilience isn't the absence of fear. It's walking forward even when you're afraid. It's staying whole, even when the world tells you to hide parts of yourself. And if there comes a time when you feel like you don't belong, remember, your difference might be the very thing others need to learn how to make room for. But first, you have to make room for it within yourself. No one spoke afterward, but their eyes told me they hadn't just heard a speech. They'd been handed something deeper than a motto or a rank. They'd been given permission to be. After training ended, a young recruit, brown-skinned, close-shaved hair, walked slowly up to me. Timidly, he said, "Sergeant, I never thought I could do this. But if you can, I think I might try." I placed a hand on his shoulder, nodding. "You don't need to be like anyone else," I said. "You just need to begin with who you are." That night, back in my quarters, I opened my phone. A new message from Savannah. "Hope just learned to say, Auntie. I think she misses you." I smiled, eyes soft with tears in the dark. After all the roads I'd walked, the choices once doubted, the silences I thought would never break, I knew now I didn't need another sign. I had chosen right, not the easy path, but my path. And on that path, I had found the most precious things of all. Family, faith, and myself. I set my phone down, still feeling the softness of the word auntie echoing in my chest, like a gentle note striking the deepest part of me. I sat by the window of my barracks room, looking out at the empty courtyard where moonlight stretched like a thin blanket across the stillness of night. And in that moment, I understood something clearly. This journey of mine, once thought to have started with an impulsive decision at 18, had, in truth, always been a declaration. One I'd written and rewritten with every step forward, every chin raised in the face of doubt, every moment I chose myself over consensus. I once believed my life was a series of fights, against expectations, against the mold, even against the people I loved. But now I know it was never a battle. It was a return to my truest self, a return to family, not by lowering my voice, but by opening my heart, a return to those who love me not despite my difference, but because of it. I took a deep breath. My chest felt light, like the first morning after a long, stormy night. There was nothing left to prove, no one left to please. I closed my eyes, and in my mind, I saw Hope, bright-eyed, wild-hearted, her name carrying a meaning bigger than any of us. Hope. I pictured a future moment where she stands at a crossroads, surrounded by voices telling her to be this or that. And I hoped she'd think of me, not as the soldier or the stern aunt, but as the woman who dared to live her life in a way no one expected and was loved because of it. I smiled, because in the end, I had learned the simplest, most powerful truth. To be loved fully, you must show up fully. Not as the easiest version of yourself, but the real one. And if someone can't love you that way, remember, you are still worthy. If you've listened this far and this story touched something in you, drop a comment below. Asterisk, have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and being true to yourself? If so, you are not alone. And if not yet, know this. When you choose yourself, you carve a path for others to do the same. Like, subscribe, and share if you believe in the power of honest presence. Because you don't have to fit anyone's mold. You just have to be brave enough to be you.